So Damago, what is your question, bro?
Okay, I made several, but few are probably outdated by now.
Okay.
I'll start with the one which I mentioned earlier this morning about the Titans and other stuff. I
Okay.
know you like those. The Titan slide to us speculation is very popular these days,
Mm-hmm.
especially with you. If we consider that during the later stages of the well, let's say so-called ordering of Azeroth, the Titans were busy elsewhere, and later they were, well, kind of dead or defeated by Sargeras. Do you think it's possible that the Keepers tried to keep the world in what their understanding of order is? That is, that they tried to follow the blueprints of the Titans without actually having their input of information. You know, Odin says that he acts as under the authority or something like that of the
Yeah.
Titans, not actually following their literal orders at the present time.
There's a couple of things that I guess we should talk about first. And the first thing is the creation of Titan Keepers. So Titan Keepers are servants. They're effectively the same as the constructs that we see within the Shadowlands. They operate under sort of a let's say software. So there's a code that's written into them at the moment of their creation, and I'm assuming that this code would look something like, you know, do no harm, unless of course the harm is to stop harm to Azeroth or whatever the case may be, right? So they do have a it's interesting, for example, that at the reordering, so the button that would basically reset the whole of Azeroth, the Titans chose not to put a keeper there, but rather a constellar, right? So there we had Algalon, that sort of oversaw it. So basically, the Titans realized that this is an important enough button that a keeper can't do this. There has to be some level of free will within that pressing of the button, because the Consular was effectively, you know, after he fought us, he was like, okay, sure, this planet is entirely corrupted, but, you know, you guys are very strong. I'm sure you guys are going to be able to handle this. Okay, so basically, it's from that we can sort of extrapolate that the Keepers do not have a lot of leeway when it comes to what they do and what they don't do. Now, it almost seems to me, and this is literally just based on my own speculation and sort of headcanon, it seems like there are also different levels of Titan Keeper. So if you look at Odin and you look at Loken and you look at Raden and those guys, they seem to be tier 1. So there seems to be a lot of rigid thinking. So a lot of this is what I was made for and this is what I do. But then also some, shall we say, free will. So Odin, for example, the things that Odin did doesn't appear to be I don't think the Titans would have signed off on this, especially considering that none of the other keepers signed off on it. So either Odin got around with by the old gods to the point where the old gods managed to sneak in a little bit of, you know, a spirit of disobedience within Odin, or they all have this spirit of disobedience within them, and Odin was the only one that managed to act on it. Now, I imagine within this code, right? So within this code that basically, you know, this is your loyalty, these are your duties and whatnot, there is also the code of what the Titans would do and how the Titans would act. And I absolutely agree with you. So there's a number of times that right now is, at least for me, very weird when it comes to the timeline. Okay, so we know that sometime after the Titans first came to Azeroth, so sometime after that, remember the Titans came to Azeroth, they ordered a bunch of things, they made the Keepers, and then they left. And then they went to Sargeras, and they spoke to Sargeras, and they told Sargeras about this planet that they had found that's the strongest planet they've ever discovered, more powerful than any of them, and that Sargeras just needs to wait, because once she's born, she will rule the galaxy, and the old gods will stand no chance. Sargeras goes, nah, fuck it, kill them all, right? And then the dragon aspect gets created. Now, either the dragon aspects were created before this moment that they die, or the dragon aspects were created after this moment. Now, before this moment, the Titans were on Azeroth. After this moment, the Titans were dead. So where exactly were the Dragonflights created? Where were the aspects' origins? Because that would really affect who made the aspects in the first place. Now, there could have been many, many decades and millennia that spanned, from where the Titans left Azeroth to where the Titans died to Sargeras. Sadly, we don't really have a timeline of those events. We kind of have a timeline, but we don't have time spans between these events. We just know how the events took place. So that's sort of that's annoying. But insofar as the Titan Keepers do a bunch of things that maybe the Titans did not decide upon, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the Titan Keepers have been doing a lot of things that the Titans would not necessarily have signed off on. Like, for example, Odin, making his entire own heaven. Because, fuck, the Shadowlands, I suppose. And Odin making deals with beings like Muazala within the other side to be able to see within the Shadowlands. And this gives him the ability to create his own army, so to speak. No one's ever told us exactly what Odin needs this army for. Like, why is none of the other Titan Keepers... So all the other Titan Keepers are perfectly happy working with things like the Earthen and the other constructs that the Titans have created. Except for Odin, who's the only one that's going, nah, I shall not. I shall do my own thing. And it's kind of weird, right? It is kind of weird. So yeah, that's sort of, at least at this point, where I would... that's the best way I can answer it. Because I don't know if you were building up to some point that maybe I'm missing. But yeah, that's just the straightforward answer, is absolutely. I think the Titan Keepers are acting right now of their own volition.
Yeah, I was actually building towards that artifact that we mentioned this morning from the trailer.
Okay.
Like, to what extent do you think that that artifact was showing the will of the Titans, irrelevant if it's the actual Titans or the Keepers, or the artifact is something completely else, which the Titan Keepers appropriated?
Yeah. So there are relics on Azeroth that we know are Titan relics. Not relics that was made by the Titan Keepers, but relics that were left by the Titans for the Keepers to actually be able to do their jobs. There's many of these relics. The same with the Forges. The Forges exist. They were made by the Titans, but the Titan Keepers can use these Forges in order to do their, follow their duties or carry out their duties. I believe that this specific Titan relic is a relic of Titan domination. Now, again, we probably have to just very quickly go over this. Domination magic, much like necromancy, is just a form of magic. It's just a type of magic. And you can achieve domination through arcane, you can achieve domination through foul, you can achieve domination through death. It really is, because we know that it was the Primus literally just wrote domination magic. He just wrote the language for it. It's just a bunch of runes. So the Titans have the same runes. The Titans operate on the same language because they're both children of the first ones. And so the Titans almost definitely also figured out how to create this quote-unquote domination magic, this domination language, if you will. And I think that this relic, this artifact that Deathwing had, I think that this is a relic of the Titans used for control. This may actually be how the Titans controlled a lot of the Earthen and the Keepers. And that could be why the old gods cursed them with the gift of flesh. Right? Because the relic may have been aligned with the constructs. So in other words, the constructs would just automatically follow whatever the relic demanded of them. And so it was Tyr that first started fiddling with it to maybe dominate or control the proto-drakes that would eventually become the aspects. And then Deathwing used it after him to control the Drakthir. So in other words, this became eventually a weapon of domination in the hands of a normal dragon instead of where it should have been, which is a Titan relic locked up in some vault somewhere. That could be that would be my guess, right? But that's just very not necessarily as well thought out as it should be, I guess.
Yes, but let's attempt just a little more to diverge into it. The issue I have with no, I know that I agree with you that pretty much every force has its own version of domination that is beyond dispute. We have actually seen many of those forces in effect using some sort of domination. Some call it insanity, some call it fell rage, blah blah, whatever.
Yeah.
The issue I have is why did they then use it just on the keepers and the other lesser constructs? Because if we remember what the Algalon said, well, first Algalon himself, he doesn't seem to be under any form of control. He actually appears to be serving the Titans of his own free will. And he mentioned that he saw like millions of civilizations destroyed by the Titans because they weren't following the ways of the Order, and we were the first that defied it. So how does that play into domination? Why didn't they just dominate every single species that they encountered?
Okay, so there's a limit to the amount of things that you can dominate. We saw this even with the Helm of Domination, which was arguably, at least according to the Primus and Zuval, the most powerful weapons ever created. And the Helm of Domination had a limit to the amount of things that it can actually control. Arthas at some point started to extend the control to where he was losing grip over his minions because he was just controlling too many things at one point, and it becomes almost impossible to do so because in order to control, there needs to be an active. It's an active process. It's not it's not a process. It's not passive, so you can't just let it run. This is where I would say, if we really want to be finicky and we really want to sort of nitpick at this, it appears as if the Titan relic of control that Tyr used, as well as the one that Deathwing ultimately used for the Drakthir, coincides very simply to creatures that are already loyal to you will become almost unquestioningly loyal when you have this artifact. And it might be that the Drakthir, within their creation process, this language was included. Perhaps that's what we saw when Maligo sent his magic out and we saw those runes popping out of the floor. What if those runes are part of their DNA? So they have that control, that domination magic is written into their DNA, because we could see it even after they awoke. They still don't, like, the relic is broken, right? The artifact is no longer around. It hasn't been around for 20,000 years already. And they still only follow Deathwing. It wasn't until they were told that Deathwing is dead that they finally said, okay, we'll follow Abyssian. Right? So that's sort of where, I don't know, right? This is where the theory sort of becomes thin because we know so little about what that relic actually does and what that artifact ultimately does.
Yeah, that's perfectly understandable. But I like to expand on the speculations that actually make some sort of sense.
Yeah.
And Q&A is perfect place for that.
Oh yeah, Q&A is fucking amazing for speculation.
Though, now you mentioned earlier the forges that the Titans build. Something crossed my mind, if I still have time to ask.
Bro, the floor is yours.
Okay. So in Dragonflight we have this wellspring of living waters. Now I haven't been actually following. Did we encounter any more lore about that?
Not that
Beyond what we knew these weeks before.
No, we know that the Titan Keepers at some point introduced Arcane into the living waters in order to stabilize them. and that the living waters also, let's say it informs the dragon aspects of order, and it tries to educate them on what order looks like and why order is so important. Steve Denuser was very careful in one of the interviews to not call it mind control. So they're not controlling the aspects, but they are re-educating the aspects. Making sure that the aspects understand order is everything. And without order, there would be death everywhere. That bothers the living fuck out of me, but never mind. We'll just run with that for now. But as far as I know, that's really the only thing we know.
Okay, so we saw that wellspring was contaminated by Yogg-Saron, and this is not a new concept. Like earlier, we had the Forge of Wills corrupted, and according to old lore, it used Azeroth's own life essence to create sentient beings.
Yeah.
Now, those parts, sentient and alive, are now under question, of course, concerning the things we saw in Zereth Mortis and the constructs and everything. Now, also its main purpose was shaping or maybe programming the sentience of the world soul. And the origination, of course, would shape the actual form of the Titan itself, if it is a Titan. How do you think those holes of infusion and Ulduras will play into that lore? Do you think they will adapt the former lore or they will retcon it?
I think there's going to be some retconning, but it's going to be It's going to be similar to the retconning that's been happening up until now, because a lot of the forges and stuff on Azeroth, we know sort of through hearsay what they do. We don't really know what they do. We have kind of an idea. So for the Forge of Wills, for example, we kind of have an idea, and we've had some lore about it, but it's almost always been hearsay. We've never really known what most of those forges do. So this is perfect when it comes to retcons, because here, it's not so much retcon as it is providing context and actually giving players the insight into what they do. But I think we are going to find out in Dragonflight that the Titans have introduced a very strict breakfast of order and control on Azeroth. Making basically, if I'm correct, the Forges is meant to counterbalance the old gods. So when they tried to rip Yesaraj out of the planet, they realized that this would kill Azeroth, and that's a problem. So then they lock up the old gods. Now, what the prisons of the old gods do is it slows down the corruption, but it does not stop it. There's no way to eliminate the corruption. How do we know this? Because we see it everywhere. Yogg-Saron is imprisoned, and yet he continues to corrupt. N'Zoth was in prison, and yet he still had a lot of influence, and his corruption kept spreading, just a lot slower. So in my opinion, these forges are meant to be like a counter drip. So when you go to the hospital, for example, and they put you on an IV drip with a steady flow of antibiotics, you have the disease within your body that is just causing a lot of problems, and then you have these antibiotics that is pumped into you to fight this disease. So think of the old gods as the disease from the viewpoint or the perspective of the Titans, and they have these forges that basically just enforce this idea of control and of order onto Azeroth, so that Azeroth will be born as a Titan rather than an old god Titan or a void Titan, as Sargeras have told us is possible, and that's what those forges do. So I think that's what we're going to discover in Dragonflight.
Yeah, I was actually hoping that they will tell us more about the old forges, because if they forget about that lore and just do nothing with it, I think that would be a waste. I mean, they're already revisiting the Uldaman and all the other Titan facilities, so I was hoping we will get more. I'm actually disappointed we already didn't get more.
No, I think we will. This expansion, I mean, takes us back to the early days of World of Warcraft. this is the opportunity for Blizzard to really dive into the primordial lore, so to speak, of World of Warcraft, because the Dragonauts were around, and there's now new leaked maps and things floating around that shows that the Dragonauts were actually part of the original Kalimdor, Land of Eternal Stars, before the first Sundering took place. So this land has basically seen the beginning of everything, right? So yeah, I would argue, sorry, not leak, but there's images floating around, speculation floating around. If you look at the maps, they look very similar. And if you look at the map of the Dragonauts, it does look like it broke away from something. So it is entirely possible that speculation is true. And if that is true, then this is the time for Blizzard to dive into just all of the old lore and really make it make sense and make it count. The only thing that could counteract that is if Steve Danusa really wants to distance himself from the old lore. He doesn't want to get into the old lore. He would like to sort of, start afresh and have his own story. Which would be very sad, because there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered to this day that I think a lot of us as players would love to see answered. So yeah, that would be super sad.